Laura, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Very good.
Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for people to join. We have quite a big group today, bigger than would ever fit into a real room at Chatham House. So bear with us for a few moments. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Hammond. I'm a professor of development studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London. And I'm really very delighted to be able to chair this session today on Somalia's elections, navigating discord, standstill, and insecurity with our featured speaker, His Excellency Xasan Cali Khayre, who, as you'll know, was until recently the Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Somalia from 2017 to 2020. We have an audience participating through Zoom and also joining through the Facebook site. So hopefully you can all see us now. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. That just to be clear that all attendees right now will be muted during the presentations. His Excellency Hassan will be speaking for about 15 minutes and we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat box at any time during the remarks or afterwards. We have some of the Chatham House staff will be gathering the comments up and collecting them, passing them on to me, and I'll try to get through as many as possible. Please, can I ask you, if you are called on to ask your question, please do it very quickly so that we can get through as many questions as possible. We have a very large audience and we want to make sure that we can hear from as many people and we can get as many responses from our speaker as possible. Zoom participants can also, so you can write questions to the question and answer box. You can also use the raised hand function in the box if you prefer to ask your question. Again, please, if you're called on, please keep your question very brief. Just a reminder that all the whole session, the remarks and the question and answer will be on the record, which means that those present may use information from the meeting and can identify the speaker and any other participant. I would also like to remind you that filming and recording the event are not allowed without prior permission from Chatham House. However, you're welcome to tweet the event using the hashtag #CHAfrica. Maybe somebody could put that into the chat for everyone. We hope that this is really, I'm sure that it's going to be a really full and a very interesting hour. This is, of course, a crucial time in the sort of life of Somalia. We're all looking very anxiously at the political developments that are going on right now. As you may know, there's an important meeting going on in Doorashada at the moment. We may hear some of what's coming out of that meeting. But we're looking not just to what happened at the elections, but what will happen afterwards. And so we're really very, very lucky today to have His Excellency Xasan Cali Khayre to share his thoughts and reflections and experience with us. As I mentioned, he served as Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Somalia from 2017 to 2020. He's now a presidential candidate in Somalia's 2021 elections. As Prime Minister, he oversaw sweeping institutional reforms, including within the financial and security sectors. His Excellency Xasan Cali Khayre initiated several flagship projects during his tenure, including introducing biometric registration for Somalia's uniformed forces and electronic payments of salaries. Prior to his appointment, he served as the Executive Director for Africa at Soma Oil. He also formerly worked for several years at the Norwegian Refugee Council and served in various senior roles, including area manager, country director, and eventually regional director for the Horn of Africa. It's my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Xasan Cali Khayre. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. How can you hear me?
We hear you very well. Thank you.
All right, just in case there is internet challenges, you will bear with us. But good afternoon, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to join you here today for this important discussion. I'm grateful to Chatham House for regularly providing a platform for open dialogue and exchange on Somalia as part of its focus for this century to enable and build peaceful, sustainable, and inclusive societies. Chatham House, throughout the first century of its existence, has been a friend to Africa and the global South, giving audiences to legendary independence leaders such as the 1931 address by Mahatma Gandhi, where he set out the vision that still drives India today, 90 years on. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Laura Hammond for her kind introduction and particularly for her continued service and dedication to socialist issues in the Horn of Africa and globally. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, we meet at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic has cost the world over 2 million lives thus far, disrupted livelihoods, and is leading to the deepest global recession. The crisis has magnified the disparities and inequalities of the world we share. It is currently playing out in a vaccine nationalism, where some countries have secured billions of doses of COVID-19 vaccines, while others struggle to access supplies, where over 108 million doses of the vaccine have been administered, and less than 50,000 of that number is in Africa. Even if there was access, a country like Somalia would not be in a position to financially place an order for purchase and would only depend on the goodwill of the world to donate vaccines. The COVID-19 crisis has also aggravated and magnified economic and social challenges that already exist within nations. In the Horn of Africa, simmering political tensions in Ethiopia has led to armed conflict in the Tigray region, with thousands of refugees crossing the border into Sudan, even as border tensions escalate between Ethiopia and Sudan. These tensions, along with Eritrea's long-standing conflict with the TPLF and the Somalia-Kenya border challenges, may alter the regional order and endanger stability. Somalia finds itself in the middle of a volatile region with its additional baggage of 30 years of uncertainty and instability. To weather this unprecedented storm, the Somali people must therefore understand the grave importance of sustaining the progress achieved over the past 2 electoral cycles since the end of our transitional government. For the past decade, despite the shortcomings and challenges in Somalia, there have been indirect electoral processes that were largely viewed as peaceful and acceptable to all political stakeholders, leading to a peaceful transfer of power. Unfortunately, this year, the ongoing electoral impasse risks that hard-earned political culture, which is one of the major positive achievements of the past 30 years. Upholding democracy and conducting free, fair, and transparent elections is not a challenge only in Somalia. And while democracy is the most preferred system of governance, we have recently learned that it requires strong and mature institutions to ensure its protection, although it is the citizens' fundamental rights. Citizens around the world have the right to elect their preferred leaders, but sometimes the result of seemingly democratic elections can produce undecided leadership that puts to test all democratic values and ideals. Other times, democracy can be hijacked in the absence. Other times, democracy can be hijacked in the absence of a strong institutions. The recent US election is the latest example of how well-functioning institutions safeguarded the world's oldest serving democracy. Therefore, if there was ever any doubt of the importance of strong, viable institutions, the aftermath of the US 2020 election is our lesson. Somalia, as a nation, can affirm in the absence of a strong and viable institutions, individuals take on that role, and we depend on the goodwill of those individuals to prevent the nation from crisis and conflict. The current electoral impasse, simply put, is a situation where the nation's institutions could not safeguard against attempts to derail the very fabric of the social contract that has existed between the Somali people. This has paved the way for great mistrust that goes beyond fear of mismanagement of the electoral process. And although there was initially an agreement by the federal government and the federal member states on September 17, 2020, on the conduct of an indirect election, challenges arose in the arbitrary management of the implementation phase. These challenges include the unilateral appointment of electoral management committees that included civil servants, security personnel, and known supporters of the current leadership. It also included the undue interference in the electoral management of the Somaliland seats. It included the unrest in some of the federal member states, especially in Gedo and in Beledweyne, as a result of interference by the FGS with the intention of unduly influencing the electoral process. It also included the real fear of militarized election. History tells us that the development and trajectory of fragile countries such as ours are inevitably linked to the management of electoral processes. An attempt to arbitrarily implement an electoral process without the agreement of the majority of the political stakeholders will result in a dire consequence and might have long-lasting repercussions. The main risk of a disputed electoral process will result in a disputed outcome that will not be legitimate in the eyes of the majority of the stakeholders. That would constitute a great setback in a fragile democracy like Somalia. Such an election would also aggravate our already fragile security situation and further embolden Al-Shabaab and other armed groups. The improved political stability over the past 10 years has also resulted in an energized business community, and this will undoubtedly reverse this positive trend, impacting the livelihoods and aspirations of our population. Somalia's revival has also been attributable in part to the generosity of our international partners whose public funds are collected from populations who freely and fairly elect their leaders. In the event of an undemocratic and arbitrary electoral process, it is unlikely that this support will continue at current levels. A volatile electoral process would also dampen the recent active participation by Somalia's youth in our country's reconstruction. Ladies and gentlemen, to further paint this picture, Somalia soon will be in an uncharted territory. The mandate of our federal parliament, the backbone of our democracy, expired on the 27th of December 2020. And in 4 days, our country faces a critical constitutional crisis where the president's mandate expires on February 8th. Considering both the executive and legislature will have lost the legitimacy to govern, the only solution to avert this looming crisis is therefore an immediate political solution. The focus is now shifted to a consensus-based agreement between all political stakeholders. These will include the federal member states, representatives of the government whose term is expiring, the union of the presidential candidates, and non-partisan groups such as civil society, women leaders, business community, youth, religious leaders, and members of the international community. to salvage the legitimacy and integrity of the electoral process, all political stakeholders have to be part of the political solution and agree on the management of the 17th September Agreement, as well as address the constitutional crisis brought on by the expiry of the mandates of the governing institutions. This will require selfless leadership from all stakeholders that puts the nation's interest before personal and political ambition. And while we seek solutions for today's crisis, we must also learn from this challenge so as to not repeat the mistake of the past and rebuild institutions that can safeguard against such situation in the future. Having that in mind, while I was in office, we undertook the biggest and most challenging reforms that our country had undertaken in the past 30 years. The economic reforms that my team and I initiated led to Somalia's attaining decision point for debt relief, an unthinkable accomplishment at that time. The critical and sometimes dangerous security reforms that we undertook reinstated faith in Somalia's security institutions internally and also built trust with our main security partners. The reforms of our civil service contributed to a greater commitment by the government to ingrain a new work culture in our public services to execute their responsibilities. By embracing this new culture of accountability, corruption was no longer a taboo subject. Public servants were more motivated to execute their mandates, and the general public were more committed as engaged citizens willing to do their part in the rebuilding of our nation. The new culture, above all, inspired many of our Somali youth to take their rightful role as the drivers of transformative agenda and change for our country. Unfortunately, the political challenge of the past 6 months, the lack of focus of continued reforms, and the deep mistrust in government's electoral management halted the progress made thus far. For our country to emerge out of its perpetual situation, the next administration must prioritize the rebuilding of a viable institutions and a functioning economy in order to be able to provide services, sustain its activities, and ultimately gain legitimacy in the eyes of the Somali people. This is because without functioning economy, any government will not be able to provide services to its people. And any government that is not able to provide services to its people will not enjoy the popular support of its population. And based on my experience, our country cannot establish strong institutions and promote sufficient economic growth in order to meet our society's needs if we do not undertake critical and comprehensive political reforms that are necessary to attain political security and economic stability. For Somalia to achieve political stability that would aid in institution building, economic growth, and service delivery, it is important for the next administration's priority to be the completion of the provisional constitution. This would unblock a number of interconnected priorities that have been pending over the past 12 years, including attaining one person, one vote, improved security, and advanced federal structures. The completion of the constitution would provide the basis for a strong and legitimate governance structures and address the deep mistrust that has existed in the country. The next leadership must therefore prioritize inclusive political dialogue to address the contentious and long-standing issues that have always been set aside to conclude the constitution. These include, but are not limited to, finding a solution to the status of Mogadishu, having agreement on fiscal federalism, the electoral and political party system, and an agreed structure of government that can lead to stability. The completion of these and other articles will require both technical and political expertise. But the essence of succeeding is to promote inclusive political reform that includes all stakeholders and making it the #1 national agenda. These political objectives will enable the changes we need to encourage social cohesion, improve security, rebuild our economy, attract investors, and enhance the capacity of government to deliver services. This will lay the foundation of the state that the next administration needs to be put in place for the next 4 years, paving the way for a prosperous Somalia that can make its contribution to the region and global community. This will therefore require leadership that has the capacity to bring people together, capitalize on its youthful population, empower our women, and build the institutions that can protect the well-being of all Somalis. It will require leadership that understands how to deal with contemporary challenges, take a major role in bridging the divide between Somalia and the region, and can understand that in a globalized world, Somalia cannot chart its path in isolation. It will require leadership that can promote and agree on the agenda of the new Somalia with all political stakeholders and our partners. I am hopeful that if we come together, we Somalis can achieve this. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You've set us up very well for, I think, what will be a very interesting conversation. You've really touched on the importance, clearly, of inclusive politics, of inclusive political process, as well as an inclusive political state, government, and touched on both some of the challenges that you faced in the past in your own public service, but as well those that your administration, should it be successful, would tackle going forward into the future. We've got several questions here, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. If I can again remind people to keep their questions quite short. I'm going to ask Abdullahi Osman, are you there? Could you ask your question? You can unmute yourself and then ask it. Are you there, Abdullahi Osman? If I don't hear from someone quickly, I might just ask their question so we can keep moving.
Okay.
You're there, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, good morning. Good morning. I want to thank Chatham House, and I want to thank His Excellency for his presentation. My question is, His Excellency was the Prime Minister of Somalia for about 3.5 years of this regime. The same regime, the same things happened for the past, for the last regime, that we have waited until the last half a year or so to start to talk about elections and the modalities of the elections. To me, the question that I do have, how much of this failure of this regime, and of course the regime before that, is His Excellency willing to say I was part of it, and specifically what I'm talking about, the completion of the unfinished constitution since 2012, the building of the constitutional court. I'm talking about the legal framework, as well as the what do you call, the institutional frameworks to accomplish this. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask have a couple of questions? Is that all right, Your Excellency? And then if we give you a couple of questions, and then you can respond to them in 2 or 3, yeah?
Yes, please. Laura.
Perfect. Okay. Mohammed Haji, are you there? Mohammed Haji, you have a question around reforming Somali civil service. Hello? Maybe he's having difficulty unmuting. I'll ask his question for him. He says, as presidential candidate, how do you plan to reform the Somali civil service? There is a repeated lack of institutional capacity in the civil service, while corruption persists due to clanism and nepotism in making appointments. So that is his question. And if you can take a note of that, I will take the liberty of adding one more question from Fataya Gele. Are you there? Fataya, are you there?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Professor Hammond, Excellency Khaire, for a great presentation. My question really was about the Constitutional Court, with the upcoming elections, all the wranglings, and obviously the consequences of that, of not having a Constitutional Court for the federal government of Somalia to settle the disputes. If the Excellency Khaire can actually elaborate on that, would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right. Okay. Your Excellency, let me give you the floor now to respond to those questions, and we'll do another round after. Go ahead.
I understand it was Abdullahi who had the first question on one person, one vote question. I'm grateful to his question. And I want to clear one thing out for our colleagues who are listening to me and fellow Somalis out there. In order for us to have a one person, one vote, there are steps we need to take. And these steps include, we need to know what kind of government structure we would want, what kind of government system we would want, what kind of political party agreements we would want as a country. We also need to accept that in order for that to happen, there must be political agreement between the federal government, federal member states, and all political stakeholders. There has always been a debate for the past 12 years on a one person, one vote election. And I think that would give the best governance in our country. But the real reality is that we must ensure that we have a constitution that answers the critical questions that we spoke about. And in my address, there are things I spoke about in terms of the outstanding articles that we need to have political agreement. Concluding the constitution, it is not what is difficult. What is difficult is to have a political agreement among all political stakeholders. And that's why I said, in the next administration's priority, concluding the constitution to enable us one person, one vote must be the priority. And I agree that that was an agenda that has been there since 2012 was you tirely for it. The second question of Muhammad Haji in terms of a civil service and institutions. I said in my opening remark that in the absence of functioning and strong institutions, individuals tend to take their position. The nation depends, therefore, the goodwill of those people and how they conduct themselves. So when you don't have institutions that function and the individuals that serve the nation are not able to put in place institutions that can run the government, then we'll have a problem. That's why during my tenure as a prime minister, my whole focus was to build functioning institutions. And I agree with you, the best way forward to prevent corruption and to promote a governance that is as inclusive as possible, we must have institutions that we all need and feel that they serve in a fair and transparent and just manner. On the final question, Professor, in terms of the Constitutional Court, this again comes back in the Constitution reform that we've talked about. In order for us to have a Constitutional Court, the federal government and the federal member states must first agree on what kind of justice model the country should have. If we don't agree on that and have it in the constitution, then we won't be able to put in place a constitutional court that is agreed by all parties. That is why, as we did security sector reform, civil service reform, economic reform, the next major agenda of our country is a comprehensive and inclusive political reform that I think would answer all the questions these three great colleagues of us did ask me. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to now turn to some of the hands that are raised. I think the first hand that was raised was Abdulkarim Mohammed. Are you there? Hello, Abdulkarim. You can unmute yourself, I think.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go
ahead.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Ask your question, please.
His Excellency, I would like to ask every Somali government or every regime fails to build the judicial institutions and to complete the Somali constitution. And instead, they focus on the effects while avoiding causes behind it. For instance, where there's no justice, peace cannot prevail. After also completing and enforcing the constitution will crack down the corrupt politicians. So the basic foundation of every government lies on the rule and regulation that governs the principle of government system and to have system that's above everyone. So I conclude my question, why not prioritizing on the root which is the fundamental of government, like building the judicial institutions and completing the constitution, instead of thinking about other things? Why not prioritizing the basic functions of a governance? Thank you.
Okay, great. And then I'll get a few questions in here, please. Mr. Gulaid Abdi? Go ahead and unmute yourself. Hello, Mr. Gulaid Abdi? No? Okay, maybe we can come back to you afterwards. Ahmed Abdallah, are you there? Hello, Ahmed Abdallah. Hello?
Hello?
Yes. Oh, Gulaid, you're there. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Laura.
Briefly.
His Excellency Hassan Ali, since you have been the longest serving Prime Minister in modern Somalia, you have been so illusional about Somaliland in terms of election. You know, Somaliland is you have been set up, you know, Somaliland elections will take place in Mogadishu, while you were so reluctant in your terms to engage Somaliland or to resume their dialogues. Why it happened like this? Why does that happen?
Okay, thank you. We have your question about Somaliland. So that's our second question. And then Ahmed Abdallah, are you there now? I think you can unmute yourself now. Ahmed.
Hello there, can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. And His Excellency, Mr. Khaire, I know him very well, and he's a very hardworking guy, and he's a good guy, really. Trust me.
Okay, can you give us your question?
And my question is, you know, Somalia, we had plenty of problems. For example, Al-Shabaab, and we had leaders who just fighting over the power. And Khaire became one of them. How could we trust him? We know him, he's a candidate now. And over the years, last couple of years, he was trying and telling and promoting us he's going to do one man, one vote. And lately he changed his mind and become the opposition's parties, one of them. And I really thinking, how can we trust him now, as we know him, he's a candidate now, and he's using all the information he knows, and that's the main question.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess in a nutshell, what is it about your candidacy that we should trust particularly now? Hassan, do you want to take those three?
Yes, Laura, thank you very much. Abdulkareem, thank you very much for the question. And I really agree with you the way you put it. Let me give you an example out of my experience. For 2.5 years, the main, I would say, project we've been working on was how to grow the economy. And to do that, we were eagerly trying to re-engage with the international financial institutions. And we, in Somalia, we've become the fastest nation for the past 30 or 40 years to reach debt relief in a record time. But in order for us to take advantage of the re-engagement and the access we have to the international financial institutions, including World Bank, IMF, MIGA, IFC, and all these, that required for us to answer a number of other questions. And these questions, they go back into the heart of your question. And that is, in order for our country to attract investors, the question that will be asked is that, is your country politically stable for investors to come and invest? Is your country security-wise stable for investors to come and invest? And do you have a justice and legal system that can promote trust and those investors will have confidence in? All these questions can only be answered if we go back to the political reform questions that you asked. And the justice and rule of law is part of the political reform. And now our country has reached as a critical crossroad, which is if we don't answer these questions, we will not be able to build a nation that can compete with our neighbors and take part of the global development. So I fully agree with you, and it should be a priority. Now we have seen it as an example. The question of Gule, I take the issue of Somaliland seriously, and it is a very important question. While I was Prime Minister, we have initiated a dialogue, and we've managed to bring Somalia and our colleagues from Somaliland to come to Djibouti, where most of the international community and neighboring countries were on board on that dialogue. Unfortunately, we've just reached a degree of progress, but we haven't concluded the entire dialogue. I understand the criticality of it, and I believe that it should be one of the most important priorities the next administration to undertake. We owe to the Somali people, we owe to the Somaliland people to make sure that this dialogue continues. We also live in a globalized world, and we are dependent on one another as brothers and sisters. I thank my brother Ahmed Abdullah's question and the way he put it. He doesn't need to trust me, but he needs to trust my record. Yes, I was the longest serving Prime Minister. In my tenure as a Prime Minister, we have undertaken the most advanced economic reform that for the first time lended us credibility within the international financial institutions and our international partners. For the first time, Somali people start enjoying for the world to see us differently and receive direct financial support to the government. For the first time, all the months I was put in place system that enabled every person who worked for the government was paid in time. We've reformed the security sector reform that everyone thought when I initiated that it is going to be the biggest disaster. We reformed the civil service reform. We've changed the culture of work and ethics in the country. We made the Prime Minister the best functioning office our country has known over the past 30 years. With that record, if the Somali people entrust me with the role of presidency, I can get the job done. Over to you, Professor.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I have a few questions that I'm going back and forth between submitted questions and raised hands. So if you've got your hand raised, bear with me. I'll try to get back to some more of those in a few minutes. But we have a question here from Yusuf Omar. Are you there? About Dusamara. Yeah. Yusuf, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Go ahead.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Prime Minister. My question is about the current meeting in Doorashada. That's about the election in Somalia. We know the Prime Minister, the federal government of Somalia actually did agree to dissolve the election committee, and also they agreed to refer to the issue of Somaliland to the Speaker of the Upper House, Abdi Hashi, and also the Deputy Prime Minister. And also the issue of Gada has been agreed to some extent. So it's all positive. So how do you, what's your reflection as a Prime Minister, the success of these agreements today in Doorashada? Thank you.
Okay, great. And then we also have a question from Abdulatif Abdullahi. Are you there? Yeah. Go ahead. Hello? Abdulatif, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go for it. Please ask your question.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Chatham House. Thank you, His Excellency Hassan Cali Khayre, our former Prime Minister. I'm Abdulatif, joining you from Nairobi. My question to His Excellency is, what are your priorities towards foreign affairs? And will you be able to correct political faults committed by the government or federal government during your tenure, like spoiling relationship with very important governments like Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to also ask Peter de Klerk. Are you there? Can you've got your hand raised. Can you ask your question? Peter.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. Peter de Klerk, visiting professor in Johannesburg. As you know, the political contract between a state and its people is based on convincing the people that there's an added value to the state in the first place. Now, in spite of your own impressive accomplishments on economic governance and accountable institutions strengthening, do you believe, in view of the continued political fragmentation, which is still very clan-dominated, that there is enough common ground and collective vision to move forward and keep the nation together to avoid a return to the fractious past, where conflicts were resolved by physical confrontation rather than political dialogue? And I'm asking this question in particular in view of the lack of federal stability. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Your Excellency, can you take those three questions? So we have.
Yes, please.
Yeah. One
Thank
about
you
the
very much.
process. Yeah. Another about the influence of Gulf countries in particular, and Peter's last question around national unity.
First, I want to thank Yusuf for sharing with us the information he did share with us. We don't have any official reports, at least I don't as of now, but we are encouraging all of us that those colleagues of us, either from the federal government or federal member states, who are representing the Somali people in Doorashada, that the entire Somali people and the nation are looking at you. And failing to reach an agreement will dash the hopes and aspirations of the Somali people. So there are three major outstanding elements, as Yusuf put it, and that is the issue of Somaliland, the issue of ghetto, and the issue of electoral management. And an overall agreement on how to manage the implementation of the content of the agreement. And if it turned out to be positive, I think it is a progress for the nation and a positive, I would say, step for all of us. So we would welcome and we will encourage and we will support, should there be a comprehensive agreement that the Somali people can be confident on. The best way forward is for us to have an agreement and to conduct an election so that we can keep that momentum of nation building. On the issue of Abdulatif Abdullahi, I want to remind all our colleagues, my country and abroad, that we can only be strong internationally when we are strong at home. What we need to focus now first in the next administration is to unify our country, bring the Somali people together and ensure that in a unified and collective communities and a nation, we can reach out to the rest of the world and look after our interests as we engage with every country. It is my belief that cooperation works best, and it's my understanding that as we protect the interests of the Somali people, we should have a positive relationship with every country that we can, but these relationships should be based on a mutual interest and mutual trust, mutual respect of all these countries who will have a relationship with. I thank Peter for serving our country for many years, and I see his question, which is rooted his deep understanding of the context of Somalia. But I think, Peter, there is a political understanding here, which I think you have debated many times with me and other people. But remember that in our country, economic challenges and poverty is the essence of the conflict that we have as a nation. A government that is not able to provide services to its people, a government that cannot build roads, bridges, hospitals, provide education and health service to its people, will not have relevance in the eyes of its people. But the problem is, in order for us to provide these services, we must have political stability. And that is why the social contract is absolutely critical. To deal with the security situation, you must reduce the unemployment. You must promote rule of law and governance. You must have functioning institutions and justice system that work. All these things impact positively in making peaceful nation. That is why all these elements are interlinked. With a new leadership who understands Mogadishu is not his or her duty station, that reaches out to people, stays with them, feels their pain and prospects, and bring the Somali people together to conclude the constitution, to put a system in place where people can trust, plus a leader who is able to communicate the new Somalia to the rest of the world, I think is doable. Remember, 30 years is a long time, but Somali people have learned a lot. Now we are at a critical crossroad. And this time, because of the progress we've made while I was in office, in terms of the function of an appointed leader, I think I see a potential for our country, because now we understand the challenges we face, and we have an idea on the solutions on how to translate these challenges into opportunities. But ultimately, it will require a solution that comes within from the Somali people, Peter, and I think it's doable to prevent it from the deepening crisis you've talked about. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take the next round of raised hands. I'll mention the three people so you can be ready to speak one after the other. So we have a few minutes left. I'll take the chair's prerogative, and I've had Chatham House's permission to go over a little bit if necessary. I hope that's all right, Your Excellency, if you've got a few extra minutes. But the next three would be Adam Matan, Fodoso Loyan, and Mukhtar Mohammed. So Adam, are you there?
I am, Laura. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura and Chatham House, and thank you, His Excellency and Xasan Cali Khayre, for your informative remarks. You talked about inclusive politics, and I wanted to know your thoughts on the allocated 13 seats in Mogadishu, and some of the Council of the Presidential Candidates has indicated that they oppose the idea, or they see the idea as a political maneuvering by the current president. So what are your thoughts on that particular issue? And do you think Mogadishu deserves to get its political representation? Thank you.
Of course, I have to unmute myself as well. Fardosa, are you there? Okay, go ahead. Fardosa, are you there? Hello, Fardosa. Fardosa Loyan. No? Okay, I'll come back to you. Mukhtar Mohammed, are you there?
Thanks, Laura. I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Laura and Mr. Xasan Cali Khayre. Just wanted to touch on your period as the Prime Minister of Somalia. Me personally speaking, Mukhtar, I am literally a product of the war. My family left Somalia, specifically Mogadishu, to move to London after the war kicked off. So I've never lived in the country. Seeing what happened in 2017 with the president Farmajo coming in as a very popular president, arguably probably the most popular, with that literal votes taking place, you had a great opportunity with Mr. President Farmajo to make changes. Just to touch on some of the points that you said about the reforms that you made, Mr. Khaire, you mentioned that you made extreme very good reforms in security and economics. Just to counter what you said, Mr. Prime Minister, as for the security reforms, you said that you made huge reforms, and clearly that hasn't mirrored with the security situation on the ground. We saw what happened in 2017 with attacks in Zobe, X-Control, and many other places within the country. Another issue, Mr. Khaire, that you've mentioned was the economical reforms. What we know factually, referencing the World Banks and all other economical hubs that are known, is that the Somali GDP has continuously decreased. So 2017, Somalia grew by 1.42, 18, 2.8, 19, 2.9, and we'll leave 2020 because I wouldn't think that would be fair. Let me move to my question now. With that level of popular support that you and Mr. Farmajo had, and why did you not use that to catapult and make actual changes, Mr. Xasan Cali? And what was the main driving factor that stopped you from gaining and using that momentum? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll also bring in Sadia Ali. Are you there? Sadia?
Yeah, hello, His Excellency, and hi, Laura. I would like to ask you a question because the women's role in elections and vote. Luckily, there's a 30%, but the 30% is only nominal. And at the moment, the women and how they are selected, is including the men, is not based on their capacity and qualification for the job. So many people like ourselves are kept at the gates because of it is clan-based. So my question to you is that men have failed miserably. That's setting aside the progress that you mentioned. Still, our country is in a turmoil after 30 years. Do you think it's about time that men stood aside and women take over the role? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Your Excellency, would you like to take those 3 questions, please?
Yes, on the issue of the first question of the 13 cities of Mogadishu, I thank my brother for asking me that. And as you could reference from my speech, the first item I've mentioned that is outstanding of the Constitution is the status of Mogadishu. Mogadishu, as you put it, has the right of representation. And it is known to everyone, it is a city with over 3 million people. But the real reality is that the Constitution says we need to determine the status of Mogadishu first, and it has to be agreed. In order for this to materialize, we need to accept the reality that it must to be included in the revision of the Constitution, and it must be agreed by all the political parties. And that is why it is absolutely urgent that we need to undertake the political reforms that I've said we should initiate. I am thankful to Mukhtar and his question. I understand that he hasn't been to his country. I look forward to him coming back to his country. We need young, constructive and critical men and women like him to come back and to rebuild his country. In terms of the economic challenges you've talked about, one thing is to see the GDP. Another thing is that to start building financial institutions that is accepted by the international community. For the first time in 30 years, Mukhtar, our nation is at a stage where we have direct access to the international financial institutions. In 2 years, in reality, nearly all our debt in reality can be relieved. We can have an access to investors if we put our politics and policies correctly. In terms of the security, I said it in my introduction, to defeat terrorism doesn't only take military structures and military means. Defeating terrorism means that you must have institutions that work. You must have good governance. You must have justice system. You must reduce unemployment. You must keep the hopes and the aspirations of the Somali people. But remember, for the first time, every soldier in our country, after I came to office, is biometrically registered, paid directly. We know his or her duty station, and their hopes and aspirations have changed. But it will take time. Remember, we are talking about a conflict of 30 years. I do understand your frustration. It is our job, those of us older than you, to hand over to the young generation the nation they have right for. We are trying to do as much as we can, and I have said it, the weakness and the strength that we faced in the country. In terms of Saadia's question, I am one of those people who believe that a country should use the potential of its human capital. If 50% of our nation's population are female, we should give at least 50% of the nation's share to women. Otherwise, we will be like an engine, a vehicle running on a half engine. In other words, if we want to compete with the rest of the world, we are in an era where there's no difference between men and women in terms of the capacity and the expertise. 30% is a start. I agree with you, and you should have the frustration that you should have. But remember, even in an advanced nations, women are still fighting for their rights. We want our strong, committed, capable Somali women to continue fighting, and they have a voice fighting alongside them, and I'm one of those people. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take the chair's prerogative, as I said, and run a few minutes over. I have a question from Fiona Lorton. Are you there? Fiona?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Excellency. I'm from the African Union, and I would like to ask, there's a resolution being negotiated in the Security Council right now, which addresses the future of AMISOM. And there is a strong push by certain member states to end AMISOM at the end of December 2021 and replace it with the new mission. And I would just like to ask you, what is your view on this matter? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I also have a question from Muna Ismail. Are you there? Muna?
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, His Excellency. My question is actually nothing to do with the elections and all that, although it relates to the wider welfare and the resource management of the country. So, Mr. Khaire, as an ex-Prime Minister, what reform did you institute during your premiership to safeguard Somalia's waters from illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing practices by unlicensed fishing fleets? And I think I will keep it as short at that. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you so much, Muna. And finally, I think this will be our last question. Mohammed Ibrahim, are you there? Hello, Mohammed. Hello? Mohammed, are you unmuted? Yeah.
Are you able to hear me now?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Laura Hammond. Thank you so much, Chatham House and Your Excellency Hassan Khaire, for this highly intriguing discussion. I wanted to touch on the issue of federalism. You talked about political stability, and is federalism the right model for Somalia, or are the people applying it, have they all misunderstood what federalism is? Because without political stability and without the right dispensation, all these reforms will go nowhere. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Your Excellency, would you take these last few questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
On the issue of AMISOM, I think we Somalis are very grateful to the sacrifices and services and the ultimate prize our brothers and sisters in uniform have paid in our country. Without their commitment and courage, and without African Union's commitment in this issue, and the troop contributing countries, we wouldn't be where we are. And it is in this rightful place for us to show that gratitude. I understand that there is always questions on when is the transition where the Somali National Army takes over the responsibility of the security of the country will be completed. The gains and the progress made by AMISOM need to be sustained. And there is a critical, I would say, progress that has been made in terms of reforming the Somali National Army, but more work needs to be done. And it is my view that until we are capable of having a completed structure in terms of security forces, we will need the support of Amazon. Remember also, it requires resources, both economic and technical. That's why I've said these reforms that we've talked about, both economic and politics, will help aid for our security forces to take up the responsibility of the country. But Mona Ismail's illegal fishing in terms of our natural resources, I couldn't agree more. Our vulnerability is one of these critical areas that we are not able to protect these illegal fishing. While I was in office, we've reached out to international partners, especially our partners of the European Union and others. Finally, we have at least managed to put in place in our ministry tracking devices that alert us and for us to know what is happening in our waters. Much work needs to be done, and that is why both financial, I would say, expertise and technical expertise will be required. On Muhammad Ibrahim's federalism question, the question is not whether this is the right system or not. The reality is that this is the system of social contract and political structure in terms of federalism that our country has agreed. I said that in my remark, the federalism came before the nation managed to put in place the systems, policies, procedures that would guide the federal structures itself. What we need to do now is that to make that real. And as we reform our political structures and conclude the revision of our constitution, we will look into the strengths and weaknesses of what is working in the system and what is not, but that must be the overall Somali people who take part of that debate. The ultimate political stability will depend on what kind of political processes would it put in place and how we make sure that each and every Somali feels that they belong in this country. They have the right access and the right opportunity so that we are all equal and we all share the same nation and work toward this prosperous and better Somalia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a really fine note to end on. We're all hoping for a prosperous and peaceful Somalia going forward, particularly over these coming months where, security and peace and hopefully smooth electoral process can be completed. So thank you. Let me thank you so much on behalf of Chatham House and all of those who are gathered here to thank you for your comments, your prepared remarks, as well as your willingness to take any question and to answer it frankly and fully. We've really appreciated the opportunity to hear from you. We wish you all the best and hope to have you back at Chatham House physically before very long. Thank you very much to everyone for joining. I think there will be a paper coming out of this session that will be on the Chatham House website in due course, and we look forward to seeing you at future similar events. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you to your other colleagues at Chatham House, and thank you to those who attended. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.